Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to the third round table of today. Our topic, for those of you who've been here all day, as you know, is accompanying generations of the entire day, a challenge for social security in France and in Europe. And one of the main areas that we think about is health, and in particular health innovations, and in particular pharmaceutical innovations. So we have in our third round table for today a group of 5 experts with us from different settings, bringing in different perspectives to discuss exactly this issue of how can we ensure access to innovation in pharmaceuticals and at the same time financial sustainability. My name is Dimitra Pantelli. I work with the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies in Brussels. And I'm the moderator today, so it will be my role to help our participants, our experts, give us their views and discuss a number of issues around this exact area of access to medicines and financial sustainability. The way we're going to do that, before I introduce our 5 speakers, is we're going to have short opening statements for everyone to set the scene from their perspective, and then I will pick out some of the themes that will have come up and we will discuss. And then you will have a chance, those of you who are here, to ask questions directly, and those of you who are joining us online to ask questions by putting your input or your comments in the chat. And my colleague Anne-Claire Lebodic from REIF will keep an eye on the chat to make sure that we capture all the important messages that you will want to give us to the panel to discuss. So without further ado, it's a pleasure to introduce our speakers. I will start with colleagues who are here in the room. And so next to me is Thomas Fatom, who is the General Director of CNAM, the Caisse Nationale d'Assurance Maladie here in France. Next to him is Doris Pfeiffer, who is the President of the GKV-SV, is the umbrella organization of the sickness funds in Germany. And next to her is Sylvain Giraud, who is the head of unit for medical products, I think, at the Directorate General for Health at the European Commission. Online with us, we have Ruth Lopert from the OECD, who is a senior health policy analyst. And we have, last but not least, Benoît Collin, who is the General Administrator from INAMI, so the Institut National d'Assurance Maladie and Invalidité in Belgium. So it's a pleasure to have all of you here today, in person or digitally, and an honor for me to chair the discussion. I think we start now with opening statements to get a little bit of information, as I said, from the different perspectives. And we start with our online colleagues. Ruth, we start with you. You bring us your expertise also from the international perspective and understanding these issues in a cross-country manner, because one of the main questions that we will be addressing today around the issue of access to innovation and financial sustainability is how countries can work together and what collaboration can look like. So we look at you as our first input speaker to give us your insights, let's say, from the bird's eye view on these issues. Ruth, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dimitra, and to the REIF for the opportunity to participate today. I begin with an apology for being unable to join you in person. As we know, the focus of this roundtable is access to health innovations and price regulation mechanisms, and my remarks will be focused around medicines, though it must be said the issues and many of the policy responses also apply to other health technologies. Can I just confirm that everyone can hear me, please, before I continue? Thank you. Yes. I think that by now, many of you will have a comprehensive understanding of the issues that are at stake here. We see many novel products coming rapidly to the market, but with exponentially growing price tags, challenging affordability even in high-income countries, exacerbating inequities within and across countries, and necessitating limits on patient access and putting great pressure on the sustainability of health budgets. Policymakers are trying to find a balance between promoting and rewarding innovation on one hand and ensuring access to medicines and sustaining the viability of health systems on the other. An often cited example is the arrival of the direct-acting antivirals to treat hepatitis C. These highly effective, truly innovative products not only came with high unit costs, but for many payers, the extensive pent-up demand for treatment meant either massive budget impact or rationing access, at least initially. Should in the future a truly innovative treatment for dementia be found, this will pose the same issue. We're also seeing novel products speeding to market, but with considerable uncertainty about the extent of the benefits they offer and thus their value to health systems. There are a number of reasons for this: choice of endpoints in clinical trials, size and nature of trials, and often the absence of data comparing new products with existing treatment options, since comparative assessments are not a requirement of regulatory approval. This means challenges for decision makers not only in assessing technical efficiency, but also in determining allocative efficiency and thus in priority setting within and across health budgets. So at this point, I'd like to circle back to the title of the session and the reference to health innovations and say a few words about the nature of innovation. Thus far, I've referred only to novel rather than innovative products. Innovation is a widely used term for which there's no common definition, and innovative is often conflated with novel. I think it's important to understand that not every novel product can or indeed should be considered innovative. Novelty may arguably be a necessary condition for innovation, but in itself it's not sufficient. Why is that? I'd argue that unless a new product increases social welfare, in the case of a medicine, produces a clinically meaningful increment in benefit to patients over and above existing therapeutic alternatives, then it's not an innovation, but merely sparkling novelty. Hence the importance of comparative data. A new mechanism of action may offer a platform or a springboard for future innovation, but a product utilising it will not necessarily confer additional benefit to patients over existing options. Equally, the granting of a patent on a product cannot be taken as a guarantee that it will enhance patient welfare. So I think we need a shared understanding of what we mean by innovative and innovation, and this is why issues of evidence are so critical. So how do we address these challenges? About 4 years ago, the OECD published a major report entitled Pharmaceutical Innovation and Access to Medicines, in which we discussed these issues at length and came up with some high-level policy options for decision makers to consider under 5 main headings. And they were reducing the costs of research and development and accelerating market access, improving the efficiency of spending, determining willingness to pay, developing new push and pull incentives to support research and development in the presence of market failure, for example, for new antimicrobials, and strengthening the information base for policy debates, which I'll say more about in a moment. There isn't sufficient time to elaborate on these in detail, but I invite you to review the report, which is available on the OECD website. And subsequent to this report, we're undertaking a number of further analyses designed to increase our understanding of the potential of some of these options. So I'll make a few final points. Currently, the World Health Organization, in conjunction with the Norwegian government, is developing something called the Oslo Medicines Initiative. This is an endeavour intended to address these same issues and focused around the 3 themes of sustainability, solidarity and transparency. And I'd like to use that framework for my remaining remarks. Under the heading of solidarity is a really important political dimension. Governments and third-party payers need to engage with the pharmaceutical industry to try to develop a mutual understanding of the issues and agree on some shared goals, goals that reflect a recognition that exponentially increasing prices are unsustainable and need to be recalibrated, and that there is a disconnect between both price and value to health systems. Dare I suggest there's perhaps a need to moderate expectations of profit in the interest of sustainability of those markets and health systems that drive those profits. Under solidarity, we can also put approaches to increasing market power by payers, to encourage and support efforts towards collaborative horizon scanning, health technology assessment, and above all, negotiation in procurement. This is the important way in which lower middle income countries and smaller EU member states can address the imbalance in market power that leads to prices that are often much higher than in larger markets. The third point under solidarity is tiered or differential pricing. Health policy analysts have been talking about differential pricing approaches for more than 2 decades. We need to move forward towards developing an agreed approach to value-based tier pricing that reflects ability to pay. And agreeing to avoid arbitrage between lower and higher priced markets is where solidarity comes in. Within Europe, of course, this would mean addressing how this could be reconciled with the concept of a single market and legal parallel trade. The second principle is sustainability. We need to enhance competition in both on and off-patent markets. This includes addressing a range of factors that potentially delay or undermine market entry of generics and biosimilars, and also addressing demand, promoting acceptability and encouraging uptake by institutions, prescribers and patients. And while policies that promote competition in the off-patent market have been well examined, much less has been written about promoting competition between products still subject to patent protection, which is another area that OECD is currently working in. The third principle is transparency. There have been widespread calls for full transparency of medicine prices, but I'm going to go out on a limb and sound a note of caution. Full transparency of net prices may have some unintended consequences. While transparency is a laudable objective, for it to be effective, we have to double down on solidarity. However, we do need to pursue transparency of clinical trial data as well as of expenditure by and costs of R&D to pharmaceutical manufacturers. We still don't know what's really spent on R&D, and as importantly, whether it is spent efficiently. We do know that there's little or no relationship between the costs of research and development and the prices of new products, another area in which OECD is currently exploring. Finally, transparency should also work in the other direction. That is, transparency and willingness to pay. There's value in developing agreed, explicit and firm criteria for coverage and pricing by payers so that pharma companies understand what sort of prices are going to be acceptable to payers and what sorts of outcomes will be valued and rewarded. I apologise for covering a lot of ground in a short time, so I'll conclude here and be ready to elaborate on these points later if the opportunity arises. I look forward to the discussion with my fellow panellists and the Q&A from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth, also for very clearly pointing out the three principles of solidarity, sustainability and transparency. As you said, these are the core principles of the Oslo Medicines Initiative, collaboration between the WHO and the Norwegian government, but they are also the key principles that we have been discussing in the area of pharmaceutical pricing and regulation for many years now. And I think, as you said, you gave us quite a lot of potential areas for action in a very small amount of time, in a very concentrated fashion. But I'm sure for our participants, this already generated a lot of ideas for questions further down during the discussion here. So thank you very much for that. We go from the more overall perspective that Ruth provided to the perspective from our hosts here from France, and to Thomas. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Et très heureux d'être.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. As you said, there is the example of France that we might look at. Just to tell you a few words about our role as French sickness insurance. It is threefold for medication. First of all, we pay for medication expenses. More than 80% of medication expenses are paid for by the assurance maladie. Then we participate to the pricing mechanism, because you know that we have a conventional mechanism inside the pricing committee. We are part of it as a funding organization, and we are also the guarantors of the right use of medication and healthcare products in general. That's one of our remits. Second point, we're going to talk a lot about challenges, obstacles, problems that we all face. And of course, there are many. But maybe we could also start off from the idea that a universal sickness insurance system as it exists in France makes it possible in most cases to provide easy access to innovative products for the people with social security coverage, both in local family practice and in hospitals. We have this system that provides easy access to innovation for patients with out-of-pocket money which is close to zero, because whenever the drugs are expensive, they are 100% covered by the French social security sickness insurance system. Maybe four points to answer the first question that you asked. Maybe I will cover a certain number of things that Ruth has already said. And maybe it's things that seem to be self-obvious, but it goes better with saying. 4 challenges. The first for me is planning ahead, anticipation, everything that has to do with predictability of this horizon scanning approach. How you can work with the payers and the industry in different countries, how you can build a system that allows you to understand and anticipate on what's going to happen, how much it's going to cost the patients, how much it's going to cost to the social security system. We have started working on this in France, and I think it's a key challenge. The second challenge, of course, is at the heart of the discussion. Obviously, it's the lead time to market for innovative drugs. How quick can we get these drugs from testing to evaluation to access to market? I will get back to this because we have changed the rules in France recently in order to get things to move faster. And also, it's probably interesting to benchmark ourselves with other countries. The third point, which is, of course, paramount when you talk about healthcare products, it's the balance between fast access and safety of the products, meaning that the evaluation has to be reliable and the impact on the real life of patients has to be properly assessed. We see that today we are on conventional borders which are changing. And then the fourth challenge, which might have been the first actually, is that of sustainability. We are going to come out of this crisis. I hope we are going to come out of this crisis. What's for certain is that we will come out of it with a high level of deficit for the French sickness insurance system. And so this poses the question of how sustainable our model is, how sustainable our medication funding system is. We have costs for each individual. If you're looking at small populations of people who have for whom we contribute a very high price, and we also have the global spend, which in France in 10 years, the drugs which are paid above the budget of hospitals have increased by 33%. That's, as I said at the beginning, the sign that we have easy access to innovation for the people who are covered, mostly in hospitals, but of course it's a key challenge for sustainability. Maybe just a few words about a few elements of a response that we have started to work on, which I'd like to share with you this afternoon. First of all, we want to speak with the pharmaceutical industry. We want this to be based on a relationship of trust. We want this discussion to be very demanding, and it has led to an early access to the market in France. It has led to a new pricing strategy, price stability for innovative drugs, for negotiation conditions with procedures like arbitration, for example, which have been implemented. And this shows that France really wants to solve a certain number of loopholes that we had identified in our system. And the past 2 years were very rich in innovation and have enabled the industry to have more transparency in order to better invest in R&D. The second thing has to do with the balance between fast access to the market and evaluation, assessment. We want to go more and more for real-life studies on the assessment of drugs. And in a way, we got married with the French drug agency, Agence Française du Médicament, and we are using their know-how, and we want to build these real-life experiments, and we think that it can be a very important tool when it comes to performance contract. It's certainly something that can be very interesting to fund innovation, provided that we have assessment criteria which are shared by all. The third element, once again, I know I'm not going to cover everything, is that we wish to share more transparency and more vision on the time to market. We have the impression today that we don't have sufficient reliable indicators to measure the actual time that it takes for medication to reach the market, taking into account the specificities of each country. Over here in France, we have let's say, the regular access to market, but we also have the fast track / early access system, which is also very important. And this one is not really taken into account by the international benchmarkings which are carried out. And we think that together we should move forward on this topic as well. And then the last thing, but of course I could discuss this for a whole day, apart from sustainability and the funding of innovation, there are two main challenges for us. The first thing is how can we have an active price regulation that would ensure that whatever is less innovative would have a different price. And also we need to work on volumes, on the quality of the prescription. In France, we have a great diversity in prescriptions, and in some cases we're not sure that the process is respected. We have to make sure that the health products are properly used. We want to try to have to file demands for reimbursement online, etc. So this is something that we have started. Just like Ruth, I guess that I have only touched upon a certain number of topics. Yes.
I will try very briefly to summarize the 4 challenges and the 4 areas of action that you mentioned, just to make sure that we got the gist right. Also, I think for our participants online who don't have the parallel translation. So check if I got it right, please, and if I didn't, let me know. So the main challenges are predictability, to be able also, and they reflect quite a bit, as you said, also what Ruth was talking about. So being able, via horizon scanning efforts, to know what is coming, to prepare, also in terms of pricing and reimbursement. To think about the delay in access and how the evaluation process goes and how the evidence is identified in order to make sure that access is as fast as possible. So we're challenge number 2. And challenge number 3 was exactly this lack of evidence and links well to one of the areas that you identified. And then, of course, the financial sustainability, where we expect that even for medicines that are for small populations, if they are very, very expensive, the budget for pharmaceuticals is expected or is feared to overcome the budget for hospitals in the future. So these are the challenges as outlined. So a number of areas for action to understand how we can adapt negotiation practices, how we can ensure stable prices, but also equitable access, and also how we can use collaboration with other countries to move forward in that direction, to make evidence production more efficient, and also to use the potential of real-world evidence. And then I think to find a way to have a sufficiently active regulation of prices so that we can use the evidence that is available and ensure good quality, also prescribing of medicines so that the right medicines reach the right people. So this would be my summary, sort of summary of the statement. And I hope I did your words justice. And as you said, we come back to a lot of these themes in the discussion. I think we go from France to the neighboring country, Belgium, and we go to Benoit online for his thoughts on this before we come back to the room here in Paris. Benoit, over to you.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me, even though I'm on video. I'm in charge of the sickness insurance organization in Belgium. I'll tell you about the context of access to innovation in healthcare. As I always say, we have to go back to basics in sickness insurance. Basically, you have to find out who you are working for, who your clients are, because we spend a lot of time speaking with healthcare providers and with the pharmaceutical industry, but we are actually working for patients. It's for them that we are looking for affordable prices for medication, affordable healthcare with a proper sickness insurance coverage. So our role in that case is that of buyers. You know, somebody talked about payers. We are actually buyers, because what we do is we negotiate the purchase of a product and make it available for the insured patients at price conditions which are acceptable. Thomas was saying that he was working in partnership with the pharmaceutical industry. Well, I don't consider the pharmaceutical industry to be our partners. Partners would be people or groups of people with whom you have interests in common. Well, to me, very clearly, the pharmaceutical industry and the other healthcare providers don't have the same objectives as we do as sickness insurance management body, which is to protect our insured people. What we have to do is to make the medication available at a stable tariff, and also maximum individual availability for the people covered. And there are a certain number of things which are negotiated, whether you're looking at doctors' acts or medication. They have to meet a basic healthcare need, and this should not be submitted to the same market rules as any other consumer goods. When the buyer and the funding body for a product are the state, you know, in Belgium, 80% of all medication are funded, paid for by the Social Security. So we are the main funding body of the pharmaceutical industry. And in that case, it's very clear that the market rules do not apply. But just because the state almost has the monopoly of paying for healthcare, especially pharmaceutical products, it doesn't mean that we have a balanced relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. We are the main donor, the main payer, if you wish, but we don't always have the upper hand when it comes to negotiate prices. And then there's something else on top of the fundamentals. You have to understand that we have permanent and fast evolution of the needs of the insured people, of the need to resort to health care. The personal condition of people evolves, and the responses that we give also change the therapeutic strategies. So we have to remember the basics. That's the insured people, accessible, affordable products at a given price and a given level of quality. We can also be very flexible in adapting our coverage to the evolutions. We need to maintain the right cover for the people. Innovation, in that case, is part, of course, of the evolutions which we have to take on board in our coverage. In order for innovation to be taken on board, to be integrated, it has to be useful, it has to be beneficial to patients, beneficial to health systems. As a treatment strategy, it has to be affordable for patients and sustainable for the health system, because, as we said, these therapies can be very expensive, but they are key for some conditions. And in that case, they are reimbursed 100% by the social security systems. And as we said, we need to have fast access to innovation. Clearly, in some cases, time to market can be a problem. So what are the difficulties that I see? And unsurprisingly, this is going to be very similar to what has been mentioned for France or by Ruth. We see that the prices for innovative drugs are more and more expensive. So we're going to have a problem in terms of the system sustainability. And we're going to have a problem in terms of access to innovation if the prices are becoming higher and higher. Another point is the justification of the cost. You know, basically, it's the seller who determines the price, and the buyer cannot really control what this price is based on. The cost-benefit analysis are sometimes not very clearly demonstrated. And also what is surprising is that the faster you want to have access to innovation, the less possibility you have at the beginning to assess the benefit. The cost cost-benefit ratio of a product. So if you have faster access, does this mean that it's going to be better access? Well, it's yes and no, because in some cases you haven't been able to demonstrate the added value in terms of treatment or in terms of price that the product offers. The time that it takes between the innovation discovery and its marketing, there's a whole process based on patents, etc., which is different in every country, and it's a long way, even though we do have a European framework in some cases, especially when it comes to reimbursement time. But between the development of an innovation and its availability on the market, there is a long way. The pricing strategy is done by every country individually. Usually the timeline is pretty much the same in all countries, but each country determines its own price and tariff, so we can provide decision-making tools, but we cannot really have an influence on the price of the medications which are bought by every country. Plus, each country is a small player, especially Belgium, but each country individually is a small buyer in terms of the world pharmaceutical market. And so all this creates tension. There is a problem of trust between the buyers and healthcare professionals and the pharmaceutical industry, which a lot of people feel imposes its conditions and takes a greater share of the budget. And there's also a problem of trust of the patients towards their healthcare system, which sometimes doesn't seem to ensure access to innovation. This is also a key challenge on which we have to work. So what are the innovative practices that we are trying to work on in Belgium? Thomas mentioned a few for France. Well, in our country, we have Article 81 since 2010, which comes on top of your typical reimbursement procedure for some innovative medications which still haven't provided sufficient evidence of their clinical efficacy, but for which there is a therapeutical or societal need, which seems to be obvious and which has been recognized, in which case we have a temporary contract which demonstrate the cost efficiency of a drug. And on that basis, the labs have to provide a certain level of result. For example, between 2010 and 2021, we had more than 200 such contracts for an amount of 2.5 billion euros with a compensation rate of 34% on average in 10 years, so that the total spend was 6.3 billion euros. The compensation rate for Article 81 increases from one year to the next, and now in 2021 we were at 45% compensation, meaning that 45% of the gross cost has gone back to the sickness insurance system, and so it can reinvest it in another project. We also have the Special Solidarity Fund, which allows us to cover things which would not ordinarily be covered by the sickness insurance. Innovative treatments can be part of that scheme, for example, on a case-by-case basis on request of the insured or of their insurance. We also have the Benelux initiative that brings together the Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Austria, so that would be Benelux A, in order to foster cooperation in 3 areas: HTA, ETS, horizon scanning, exchange of information between the pharmaceutical market and prices, and disease registry, and then common negotiation scenarios for the reimbursement prices, meaning that we come up with a scenario that everybody's going to use in their countries. They are free to apply it as they wish, but we start with a common scenario so that the pharmaceutical companies have the same way of discussing from one country to the next. In this horizon scanning, we also added the International Horizon Scanning Initiative, which brings together a certain number of countries, Benelux A plus Ireland, and it sets up international monitoring of innovation. It's like a scanning for all innovations. We have a database, we enter a series of data, clinical, data about the industry, about scientific information, and twice a year we come up with a report that indicates the impact of innovation in 8 therapeutical areas in order to make it possible to have an early access to these products. And when we start the negotiation as early as possible, we have a better definition of opportunities, uncertainties, budget problems, and it offers more transparency, as Ruth Lopert said, for buyers, more transparency for buyers who can define their own willingness to pay, and budget predictability, and also on the supplier side, because they can include development costs and therapeutic value before the decision is made on the reimbursement. We also have HTA processes which have been adapted to the early access system, with clinical experts working on the incidence of new therapies, on the therapeutic strategy as a whole, not only for medication, but all the therapeutic needs that exist today and how much they can change the strategy and make it change in a positive way. We also have a pharmaceutical industry working on compassionate use and unfunded or unmet medical needs, and we also have a new high challenge model with a realistic budgetary framework with a higher price for innovation when the value of it can be demonstrated. I think there are 2 or 3 more points which I think are interested. What's the role of European Union in support to the member states? I think that, as we said, the European Union, just like every country individually, has to reconcile, on one hand, the innovation policy. This is why it's important to develop a European medication and pharmacy pole or cluster, but also we need to focus on social protection in order to obtain the tools to manage all these innovations that will make innovation sustainable for the system. So we need to create a more balanced relationship between social protection systems and the pharmaceutical industry. That's it.
Summarize the points that we resonated with already. This was very comprehensive. Thank you. I would like to point out, I think, starting, and please correct me if I misunderstood, the most important issue of reminding us the role of social security, which is exactly to cover the insured at a cost that is manageable and it is acceptable. And I think that's really why we're here discussing this. And this issue of delayed access and managing access, and the faster we get access, the harder it is to evaluate the actual benefit that new medicines provide. I think this is one of the very important issues that we will come back to discuss. I think you mentioned two of the innovative approaches in Belgium. The first one is this parallel track of outcomes-based collaboration, as far as I understood, where you get back a share of the costs if the medicines do not perform the way that they were supposed to perform, and of course the Benelux collaboration, where you have, with a number of other countries, exchange of information and expertise when it comes to making negotiations more fruitful. Clearly a lot of other aspects that were highlighted, but we come back to those in the discussion, if that's okay with you. And I think we move now from Belgium to Germany, and to Doris from a perspective from the German system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I have to say before that there will be some points that were already mentioned in the statements of the colleagues from Belgium and France, but I think we will realize that there are some differences in weighing the points because the systems are different. And I think we can discuss this further on. I also will begin with key challenges we have to face. As the other colleagues also mentioned, high prices and financial sustainability is one of the key challenges, given the high cost of medicine. Ensuring the supply of affordable, high-quality medicines for patients is a Europe-wide challenge. And it's the role of the health insurance funds to ensure a secure access to innovative and high-quality medicines with proven benefits, that was mentioned already too, while fostering also the financial sustainability for health systems as a whole. And the centralized marketing authorization procedure for medicinal products and joint incentive schemes for certain groups of medicines mean that the EU also has a responsibility for ensuring the supply of safe, innovative, high quality and affordable medicines. And I would like to add that in Germany we have the special situation that every drug that has admission by the EMA has to be paid by the sickness funds. There is no further border limitation or approval. And therefore we think that any future initiative by the EU must strike the right balance between innovations, access and affordability in the pharmaceutical system. The second key challenge was already mentioned, I think, by Benoit, the accelerated access we see on the EU level. The accelerated marketing authorization of medicinal products must focus on filling genuine gaps in healthcare. Our experience with these accelerated marketing authorization shows that the developers often do not present timely and sufficient evidence for additional benefits. And that has a result in prices that jeopardize the sustainable financing of the health system. Therefore, we are quite reserved when it comes to the extension of EMA's PRIME scheme, the program supporting the development of medicinal products addressing unmet medical needs. And we have to look at what are really unmet medical needs, and not to give us all financial problems. Third challenge is slicing. It is very concerning that new medicine with extremely high prices are being authorized for increasingly smaller patient groups. And incentives for developing medicines for truly rare diseases must provide real benefit for patients and not only in these small features. The EU Commission, we think, needs to use its pharmaceutical regulation to steer incentives to fields of truly unmet medical needs. The last challenge I want to mention here is the problem of shortages. Throughout Europe, supply bottlenecks and contamination of active ingredients have negatively affected the patient's confidence in the supply of medicines. For us, such bottlenecks are unacceptable. We think we have to support supply chains that are organized in such a way that it's guaranteed that medicines are available to patients. And the COVID pandemic has illustrated the need for more resilience in our health systems once again. We welcome that the EU has taken first steps addressing shortages in case of health emergencies. We think the most important thing in this field is to come to more transparency in all fields of production of these products and the supply chain and so on. For Germany, especially for our country, we have an instrument since 2010 called the AMNOG regulation that allows us to do pricing referring to the extra benefit of a drug, and the reimbursing process is thereby steered. Up to that point, we had to pay every price the the pharmaceutical industry said. So we had all the drugs in the market that were licensed by the EMA, and we had no influence on price. So this was a very big step, and we now see that it works, but still we have some regulation improvements that we would like to see, because up to now, in the first year of the new drugs, the patent drugs, the pricing is still free for the pharmaceutical industry. That means for the first year, the pharmaceutical industry can set a price they want to. After that, we do the bargaining based on the process of looking at the extra benefit that these drugs have. So we want to have that improved. The new government has said that they will reduce the free pricing period to 6 months. So it's 6 months less now. Shall be, is not yet, shall be. And we have sometimes still a lack of data to prove the benefit the new drugs have. But we have some other instruments in Germany. I think I can make that very short. The reference pricing is an instrument we have since the 1990s, and it's very effective in reducing costs for drugs. We have a price moratorium. The pharmaceutical industry cannot increase prices only in small fields. We have a very high part in prescribing generics in Germany, and we have also agreements on price reductions or rebates, which sickness funds can bargain with pharmaceutical industry. I think in the end, the most important issue is that we have to see both, on one hand, the fast and broad access to medicines with tangible patient benefit and financial sustainability. So these are the key points, and we hope that we have a supportive regulatory environment, both on national and on EU level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris, and perhaps just to highlight this element that you highlighted as well of the free pricing during the first year, and all medicines that are basically licensed by EMA are automatically reimbursable in the German system is also perhaps the difference to the French system, and where this issue of how long it takes until we evaluate so that patients have access does not really apply to Germany, but then the financial sustainability issue is more of a challenge, because in the first year you don't really have a lot of control on the price, just on this issue that sort of is a different input that we had from France and from Germany here. So thank you very much. Last but not least, Sylvain, we come to you from a perspective from the European Commission, or from the European perspective. Thank you.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Vous m'entendez bien, oui.
So can you hear me? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So many things have already been said by the colleagues who referred to the importance of cooperation between member states, especially in terms of the European Union, but also in other types of cooperation. Just like the cooperation in the Benelux countries, or in a more global context within the WHO or the OECD, each organization has its own specificities and the possibility of pushing this matter forward. But in terms of Europe, the European context, we have a system and we can give a European perspective on these issues. But in the European system, when we talk about a medicine policy, we have elements of integration which are quite advanced, common regulation, common authorizations, which are centralized. And of course, we have companies which are European companies or or even multinational global companies. But also, as was already said, we also have to, we have a fragmented market in Europe. So each of us constitutes its own market, and some markets are bigger than the others. But at the end of the day, these are small markets, and the European system doesn't always allow for economies of scale or synergies, whereas foreign players could have, and citizens might think this might be a disadvantage for them. There are national authorizations, there are national reimbursement systems. You've already heard about a number of differences that exist in terms of the way each country manages its own policy in terms of the reimbursement price. And so this depends on the political choices of that country. So in this context, what can we do at the European level? Well, basically, we have regulations that have been in place for a couple of years, and the member states wanted to discuss and go beyond these regulations that concern safety and quality. They wanted to discuss the clinical and other aspects, and they also wanted to start discussing other aspects. So this has taken some time, but if you look at the history and the conclusions drawn by the Council of Health Ministers, which is a good indicator of what member states can do together, you'll see that over the last 10 years, regularly, there have been conclusions from the Council Minister that say, okay, we want to work together on this, that, and the other, and concepts have come out over the years: availability, access, capacity. So how is it that a lot of the products that are authorized, by the EMA are not available in Cyprus? So there are issues like this. There's an imbalance, an inequality between member states. There are many reasons for that. So availability, also an issue of shortage, which is recurrent, and this has been stepped up during the pandemic. So those kind of issues are emerging. But then there's also the issue of the durability of the systems, the sustainability of the systems, financial sustainability, and then in more general terms, and also what we call affordability, the financial access to the systems, but also in terms of the remainder that needs to be paid by the patient. So all these different questions have come up, and there was a desire to discuss all these different things, but the Commission at the end of 2020 produced the European strategy, the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which goes over all these different challenges and which tries to come up with an integrated approach, and which also tries to move away from the trap whereby if we want to have a strong industry, if we want a competitive industry, one which creates jobs, which is strong globally speaking, then we will have to have expensive medicines for the health systems. And this is something of a trap, and it comes up recurrently. So at the end of the day, the price of medicines become a kind of political and industrial instrument. And the pharmaceutical industry, there are many different incentives, tax and others. These are not necessarily linked, but and they don't necessarily, at the end of the day, have an impact on the budgets. But there's a certain pressure for health systems to become a kind of source for funding an industrial project. And so there's a risk with the approach moving away from this trap, and let's have an integrated approach, because at the end of the day, all these policies which are supported by industry, competitiveness of industry, And we do need quality healthcare, populations in good health. But at the end of the day, it's the same governments that are responsible for these policies. And so there are some decisions that need to be made there, rather than looking at things than saying it's either one or the other. There'll always be a price to pay. So we have to see what the win-win situations are. So perhaps it's a bit naive to see things like this, but it's only by having a more integrated approach that we can achieve this. So it's a naive approach then that we decided to present in this document: availability, accessibility, industrial competitiveness, sustainability of the systems. And I would also add how what about the role of our system in the global arena, in the global world? So we have high standards for protecting health and the environment. That is also one of the challenges of this. So it's around these different concepts that we developed our strategy, based on the idea that patients should have access to innovation, but it has to be an innovation which is truly innovative and which responds to the unmet medical needs. And this access has to be as similar as possible and equal as possible across the European Union. We must continue to make sure that the industry is able to innovate, but it's not just the industry. There's R&D, which involves an enormous number of public players, and make sure also that the supply chains for the European market correspond to the needs, and so that they can deal with this issue of structural shortages, which has created dangerous dependencies. So we have to make sure that the health systems have the ability to pay, but also they have some leeway in terms of the political choices, in terms of what they pay, what they don't pay, how do they pay, what is the value of the funding, and what do they get in return, what type of contracts exist. This has already been presented. So giving them the ability to make a choice between the analysis of the financial value, the therapeutic value, the medical service, compare it to what already exists, and of course using objective evaluation tools so that they can make political and financial decisions, and at the end of the day promoting regulation, which I've already mentioned. So if you like, in terms of this strategy, which I would encourage you to read, there are two different dimensions. The first is the review of European regulation, because even if European regulation is focused on the role of the EMA and the way in which the EMA prepares the authorization for medicines, which comes from the Commission based on various recommendations. So the regulation concerns these elements, but also financial incentives through exclusivity rules for markets which already exist in terms of intellectual property, and which protect these medicines, and which compensate for this therapeutic process. So there are different aspects in the regulation, and this regulation is very specific. But even if it doesn't regulate the price issue or reimbursements, which are decided at national level, it doesn't also deal with the supply chain element, but it does have consequences on those different aspects. So in terms of reviewing European regulation, we have to take into account these different consequences, and we have to see and analyze how this regulation might hinder a better competitive functioning of the markets. How can we take into account the market effects in terms of affordable pricing, and this will come about due to certain regulations. How can we use the marketing prices to include certain conditionalities, which would facilitate access and which would mean that there was quicker access to more affordable medicines? How can we introduce conditionalities in these tools for marketing medicines to overcome the issue of shortfalls or any problem of supplies, to secure the supply chains and also to reduce any dependencies that exist in various parts of the world? And finally, how can we link this regulation to the rules on quality for producing medicines and the risks of the environment, adapting these production methods to new technologies? So there are enormous number of different aspects in terms of this strategy. We try to present these in a structured fashion and to propose this review of the regulations that I've just suggested, and that also there's a whole series of opportunities for member states so that they can discuss, learn from each other, and pool their abilities to develop common tools if they so desire. And also, that's an important element as well, perhaps more important than the regulations and legislation. Thank you.
Also for explaining how the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe came about. I think it's very important that for everyone to hear that repeatedly over the years, as you said, the Council conclusions of the Council of the European Union reminded that we have an issue with high-priced medicines, we have an issue with access, we have an issue with financial sustainability, and also of pointing out that the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe has so many different dimensions. Core dimension of revision of existing regulatory frameworks to make sure that they are fit for purpose and also take into account a number of different elements, but also for providing a platform for collaboration and for member states to bring their strengths, let's say, together for moving forward. So I think we've heard a lot of different and a lot of similar inputs from our speakers. I thank you all very much. One thing that I would like to pick up for us to discuss in a first round of discussion is this issue that all of you mentioned of what we mean by innovation, and how the most important thing is to make sure that we pay for medicines that actually bring benefit to patients, that actually improve social welfare is the way that Ruth started us off. And so essentially this means paying for medicines that meet patient needs, steer also innovation in the direction that goes to meet needs that aren't covered yet. And so my question then to you is, how can perhaps you as payers, or from your perspective, how can you help to make sure that innovation goes in the direction of producing the medicines that we need, rather than that we just react by paying for the medicines we get, in a sense? So I don't know if someone enthusiastically wants to start. They can wave at me. If so, Benoit. Perfect. Look at that. Thank you very much, Benoit. Please go ahead.
Je pense qu'effectivement, on a pas mal parlé.
So I think that we've talked a lot about horizon scanning, which carries out this kind of technical monitoring of potential innovations. So that is an important element. But as you've said, the first thing is to know about the needs and to have a good inventory of those needs of patients, the therapies, the evolution of therapeutic strategy. And if we know the needs, and if those needs have been met or not met, and I know that we can talk a lot about this concept, but if we know the needs and we know how the different therapeutic strategies will evolve, then we can do a match between the needs, innovation, and also the innovation. So the innovations are already in the offing. And this is one of the objectives of Horizon Scanning International. So to see what the different innovations are, the possible innovations, but also to see how these innovations will respond to the unmet needs or frequently met needs, how they will respond to the needs where the cost and benefit is not optimum. So we do this kind of matching. And another point is that the payer should become a buyer And so somebody that negotiates the conditions rather than just funding at a certain price. And so they have to create a balance here. So, and they have to decide on the price that they want to pay for this innovation. And in this particular sense, they can participate more rapidly on the marketing of some medicines. And also they can promote innovation in terms of research. So I think so as a payer, as a financier, this is a way of influencing research and innovation so that it does meet the unmet needs or those needs that are not sufficiently met, let's say. Thank you.
Of horizon scanning and different financing tools, and also looking at this newer ideas of perhaps advanced purchase agreements that we've seen. Thomas, I see you're willing. Thank you. Go ahead.
Merci.
So perhaps we can just point out something which is quite simple to try and identify what an innovation is. So if you do that, so you need an independent evaluation or assessment by the payers, the industrial people, the ministries. So we have to say, does this medicine, is it indeed an innovation? Does it improve the treatment? Is the system sufficiently solid? Can it resist? Can it withstand this type of pressure? And will it help the system to move forward? And then the second point, and I go back to what I said before, in real life and the real life of the product. So we have these data systems which allow us to say, well, you have suggested a product, we've assessed it, and so it does improve the therapy considerably. So, and we see this effect, but then we have to assess it after 2 years to see what it actually does. And then we have to make a real difference in terms of price management between what is innovative and what isn't, or what is less so. And the reality of what we see in France is that we have a form of pressure. So I have a real innovation, and this really is a true benefit for the patient, so it justifies the high price, and it will last for such and such a time. But at the same time, if you bring down prices, well, you will endanger the industrial policy in France, in Europe, and also a supply over the long time. And in that respect, I have to say that this was something that came out after the crisis. Things have become more complicated. It's a system of dual pressure. So the industrials are a kind of partner. But if we have to have high prices for innovation, and then at the same time we save for more mature medicines, we can't continue to bring down the prices, because this will endanger the presence of these industrialists in Europe. And also endanger supply, and in that case the situation becomes very complicated.
Ensuring the innovative potential of the industry is linked to the price and volume of consumption, right? So this is the discussion of delinking that we've had for a number of years now, finding different ways to ensure robust innovation systems that are not necessarily only relying on the price times volume for revenues for the industry. And I think this goes back also to what Sylvain was talking about understanding fundamentally that it's industrial policy and health policy at the same time, and you need to understand how the system as a whole functions in order to make a difference, I guess. Doris, can I come to you? Yes. Thank you.
Yes, that's a good link, because we have to talk about power and who has the power. Industrial policy is the key word, and that I mentioned before that since 2011 we are able in Germany to bargain prices for medicines based on proven patient benefit, and that's an essential point. important thing about that, or the interesting thing about that, is that it was a government in Germany where we had Christian Democrats and Liberal Democrats who were known as being friendly to the industry and the economy. And this government made this regulation, which was a very central change in pharmaceutical pricing at that time. So since then, we have for every new patented drug this process of evaluating the benefit and looking at the surplus, and this being the basis for the pricing. So this focus on proven patient benefit should be essential for all of us. And we should also, when we talk about medical needs and unmet medical needs on a national level, but also on the EU level, look at medicines and their proven benefit, not just because there is some unmet need and someone brings some probably innovative drug. This should be subsidized by whomever, and that's what the first point is. We should have influence of the healthcare systems also on the research and development of medicines when it is subsidized on national or EU level. We should look at the definition of so-called orphan drugs. We have a definition in Germany. Orphan drugs are those who have a maximum of annual turnover of 50 million euros. So the industry starts slicing the indications, and lots of them are below 50 million, and the law says every drug that is below this 50 million has a surplus benefit by law. Never tested, never made studies about that, and this is an incentive for the industry to slice these indication fields. That's clear. Now the new minister says the new government wants to reduce this to 20 million euros, so might be different. And when you look at these medicines after they have reached the 50 million that we have now, or going above that, only half of these orphan medicine have an actual additional benefit. They couldn't prove that afterwards. So you see that there's this strategy that is used by the industry. We also have the discussions about drugs for children diseases, having appropriate dosages and so on. And our goal is that the regulations have to give incentives on national and on EU level that this targets can be reached, and that we have also the thing of the distribution in the EU countries, that there's an obligation to market these products in all EU member states so that all patients can benefit. So there are some goals that we have also in the EU legislative process, so that the concentration on proven patient benefit on the one hand, but also on the access, the opportunity for all people in European countries to get access to these new drugs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doris. I think that a lot of very interesting bits that I wish we would have time to pick up, like the real world evidence that Thomas was talking about, and how we look at that, especially looking at the joint health technology assessment that is coming our way in Europe, but also these changes in regulation that ensure that medicines are launched in all countries. So a lot of different ideas and I think actions that we will be looking at moving forward. Sylvain, I will come to you on this question on steering towards the areas of need. Before we go to Ruth, who is the final panelist to react to this specific one.
Merci.
Thank you. I think that this concept of unmet medical needs, of course, is difficult to develop evaluation criteria for. What is an unmet medical need? how can it be met if it doesn't even exist? I think that's how we can bring things forward, but this can only be done through an integrated approach of the political objectives and of the public stakeholders. That is, public stakeholders whose role is to fund research, public stakeholders whose role is to organize clinical trials, public stakeholders whose role is to prepare scientific assessments and to approve the medications, the public stakeholders whose role is to assess the cost-benefit efficacy through the HTA processes, those whose role is to set the prices and to negotiate them, public stakeholders whose role is to take care of the procurement, etc. So all these players, and there are many more because I'm sure I'm forgetting some in my list. Well, I forgot to mention those who are here, that is those who are at the end of the line who reimburse the medications. Well, anyway, all those stakeholders are working very well on their own, but sometimes they're not working so well together. You know, we've heard this example that you gave about the way you work with the medication agency on the data generation and how the data generated by the medication agency is not always useful. So that's the point. Generate data which is going to be useful in the first phases, especially when you talk about easy access, when you talk about placing products on the market on the basis of scientific evidence that is still to be developed. You know, well, all this data which is generated must be useful for the next links in the chain, for HTAs, for pricing, stakeholders, etc., so that they can get this real-world evidence, because it's key in the process. So it's some kind of an integrated approach of the concept of unmet medical needs, and it goes all the way from the funding of research to the reimbursement to patients, and we should have a much better integrated policy.
Might sound a little bit like an insurmountable challenge to bring all those different actors together to have a joint understanding, but I hope, Sylvain, that with the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe and all the discussions we're going to be having in the near future, that maybe we manage it. Ruth, we come to you last but not least, briefly on this one, and then we can take some questions from the audience here in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, because a lot has been said. I endorse much of what Sylvain said. I agree it's an insurmountable challenge, but I'd like to circle back to something I said earlier, and that was in terms of not being passive. I think it's important for payers to actually signal, to identify not only priority unmet needs, but to signal what they are prepared to pay for products that actually address them and by how much. I think that would be helpful in directing the pharmaceutical industry or enabling the pharmaceutical industry to know what its targets are. I have some other comments, but I think I'll leave it there in the interest of leaving time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Maybe we come back if we have time, and I think just to link to what Benoit was telling in the beginning of this round, exactly about the role also of the payer and of signaling priorities. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes, well, no, 10 minutes left of our time for today. We have our magic working the floor here in the room, so we know we have 2 questions at least, yes. And then maybe if we have time, we ask one final question at the end to all of you coming from me, which is, what should our collaboration across countries look like in the future, and what you would like to see more of? A lot of you hinted on that already, but we'll take that as the closing round. It also came up in the chat, I was told, so it fits well together. So we start with Yanis. I can see you. You have a question, and then we have one more, as far as I'm aware.
Oui, merci Dimitra, merci à tout le monde.
Thank you. I'm Yanis Natsis, director of the European Social Protection Platform. If you see a difference, it's for Benoit Collin. If you see a difference in the behavior of the pharmaceutical industry between the pandemic and after the pandemic. A question to Ruth.
Financialization of pharmaceutical systems. Are you looking into that? And last question for Doris Pfeiffer. You mentioned the role of the European Medicines Agency. Is the EMA listening to you or ignoring you? Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you, Yanis, also for asking 3 questions for the price of 1. That was a bit sneaky. So shall we start with Benoit and the difference between the pre-COVID and post-COVID era, or COVID era? We're not post-COVID era yet.
Well, I must say I haven't looked into that for the moment. So I can't really give you an answer right now. I think that the pandemic has taught us a lot of things in terms of the European response capacity. We saw that at the beginning we were in a little bit of a panic and then things got organized. It was the same in our governments. You know, we have 8 health ministers in Belgium and the 8 of them at the beginning would not talk to one another. So we see that there has been an evolution and there has been an improved response because and that's why it's important to have a strong European strategy. I think it's important, and it's important to have a strong European industry. And as Sylvain said, it's also important to have an important social protection system because, you know, it's public funds who actually pay for the funding of medication. So if the pharmaceutical industry actually uses up all the funds, well, there will no longer be a system. So I think that the COVID crisis enabled all of us to realize the difficulty and also the quick response capacity that we have in the face of a problem in which, for once, health prevailed over the economy. And that was one of the lessons from the crisis, for sure.
Yanis' second question, someone else from the panel wishing to react to this about a change in atmosphere or in process or in strategy because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thomas?
Yes, I'll take this opportunity to not answer the question, actually, but I think that the importance of the supply chain approach and the fact that there should be no break in the supply. This was, of course, a major point during the crisis. It's an interesting point in the pharmaceutical strategy of the Commission. And it's also a topic on which we should work all together. In terms of the union, the countries, the pharmaceutical industry, I think we should be even more demanding because the reality today, before the crisis, is that there were shortages in some drugs. Well, it should not happen. And we should increase our level of requirement regarding the pharmaceutical industry because, you know, public funds are the payers, and so it would not be acceptable if it was not public money, right? So from this point of view, I think that our level of requirement towards the union and towards every country and towards the industry should be raised. We should not have shortages as we have had. We have a plan for shortages in France, but it's something that we should beef up together with our European counterparts.
Come in, yes.
Oui, non, évidemment, je souscris à ce qui a été dit sur cette aspect.
Yes, I agree with what's been said, but since we're talking about the crisis, I wanted to say that, you know, we did not talk about the affordability issue because, of course, all of a sudden there was a lot of money on the table for health. But there is something that we saw during the crisis, nevertheless, and I really want to draw your attention on that, is that we saw member states buying medication or vaccines together. I think it was the first time that it had happened at such a scale. And I think that this is a major advance. maybe we will have to draw the lessons from that exercise in the aftermath of the crisis, and maybe we'll have to try to think if maybe that kind of model could apply in another framework at another moment in other conditions.
After an hour and a half, I would ask you if we can use the joint purchasing approach for other medicines, or if we should, but we don't, so I won't. We go to the second question, which was to Ruth, I think, but also to everyone else, which was about financing institutions, Yanis, if I remember. Again?
About financialisation.
Okay. Ruth.
Yanis, thanks for the question. The issue about financialisation, in fact, the OECD is currently undertaking some research as part of a broader work stream on transparency of pharmaceutical markets. We're looking at performance of the pharmaceutical industry, looking at principally at inputs and activity, levels of activity and expenditure. And we expect to highlight some issues around financialisation as part of that project, which will be completed early next year. So I won't say any more than that in the interest of time, but the answer is essentially yes, we are looking at it. Thank you.
Okay, so this is just a preview or a sort of later something to be looking forward to, Ruth, from your outputs. Great. We'll keep your last question to Doris, not quite yet, because the final round is about what can we do differently in collaboration. So we'll take that with that. But I understand we have one more question. I think it comes from, yes, from over there. Briefly introduce yourself.
Oui, bonjour Catherine.
Good afternoon, I'm Catherine Pasaresi-Sanchez. I'm the Vice President of the International European Affairs Commission of the European Council, Economic and Environmental and Social Council. It's not a question, it's just a comment. I'd like to tell you that the COVID crisis and the position of French citizens during conferences on the future of Europe have led us to start working on how we can build a Europe of health, because we started off from the fact that the COVID crisis demonstrated that Europe did not have a shared competence in terms of health, but was nevertheless able to mobilize resources to face this unprecedented crisis. And it has emphasized the need of the French and European citizens to have a Europe that protects them. On the top of their list is health. And for French citizens, actually, they had this idea of a European universal social security system. So on April 12th, we are going to give issue recommendations to go a little bit further than what's been done already. We started off with the political challenge, with a governance challenge, with a research challenge, industrial challenge, and we are going to issue our recommendations to build a global health system that we are in favor of here at the EESC, and also very concrete suggestions about shortages, for example, about how to increase our strategic industrial independence in terms of healthcare products. So on the 12th of April, I hope that we will vote on that opinion and we will send it to the French and European decision makers.
It was the second sneak preview for things to look forward to in the next few weeks. We are running out of time, so we won't take additional questions. I apologize. Sorry. But we come, I think, based on the last intervention, this idea of a social insurance or social security for Europe. This has been discussed in different ways in different countries. I think one thing that we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic is this idea of a European health union. And there are different initiatives and everyone understands it a different way. So we link that with the final question, which is coming out of the pandemic with stronger collaboration, particularly in this area of pharmaceuticals. What should this look like from your perspective? And you can weigh in on the different things that came into the discussion. My suggestion is that we go in the inverse order from the one we started. So we start with Sylvain, we move on to Doris, followed by Benoit, Thomas, and Ruth. So Sylvain, as our European perspective par excellence, I start with you.
Yes, oui, bien sûr, bon, évidemment, mais...
Of course, but the European framework is there to serve the member states. So the strategy, as I said, offers cooperation in many areas, including that of supply chains and how to strengthen them. And it's really important. And if we focus on aspects which have to do with payers, we thought that we could call them buyers, because I don't like the word payers. I'm sure there are better words. Maybe we should call them social coverers or whatever. Anyway, these people, these bodies, were not always very keen on European cooperation. Maybe, that's my interpretation, because they thought that European cooperation would generate more problems than solutions. I think that things are starting to change here. I think that people are more willing to cooperate. Anyway, at the European Commission, we do not have a healthcare system to manage. Well, there is one for European Commission civil servants, but that's something else altogether. We have a framework to supply for these authorities who manage national competencies, of course, and this is not going to change, of course. I have to say that every time because it's important for national authorities, but we are there to help them talk together about their national competencies and about all those tools which have been mentioned in the first part of this roundtable discussion. We have examples in Belgium, in Germany, in France. There are things which have been implemented. You have the Benelux A type of initiatives, etc. So the OECD also contributes their expertise because they analyze all the agreements, etc. So we could take all contributions, put all this on the table and see together how we can work together on public procurement. The idea is not necessarily to do everything jointly, but we could discuss our national procurement methods in every country, how we can share best practices, how we can use public procurement better. You know, there is a very long list, I have it here, if you want, of all the things that we could discuss together. We have a working group which is called NCAPR, National Competent Authorities for Pricing and Reimbursement, and I'm sure that INAMI and CNAM are part of this group because each country decides who they are sending. Sometimes it's people from the ministries or from the sickness insurance systems, etc. But it's good to have this diversity of representatives. And on that group, the NCAPR, we make it possible for member states to come up with their own agenda of discussions, and the objective is to have very down-to-earth collaboration on very technical topics, not necessarily to come up with a joint policy and with a consensus. The objective is for every country to find some benefit, to share their difficulties and to find solutions. We have some countries which are much more advanced than others. And the countries who are present here today are much more advanced than others, but the others would need to get together even more. Thank you. Thank you, Sylvain.
Point also, because we heard a lot of commonalities, but there are also a lot of differences in what different countries need. Doris, over to you.
I think I have to answer this question. We would prefer if they would listen more. As I mentioned before, the strongly rising number of accelerated access with very scarce data is a rising problem for us. That's the point. Just one point to the buying of vaccines in the EU by all of the countries. I think it was a great luck for all the citizens in the EU, but I think we should know the conditions of these contracts before we say this is an example for the future, because I think it was very expensive, so might be not so easy to copy that for future contracts. To the general thing we mentioned before, the healthcare systems in Europe are very diverse, complex, and carefully designed within their national context. And in respect to the subsidiarity principle, it is important to scope for coordination or cooperation at the EU level. I think the HTA regulation is a good example for enhanced cooperation bringing together the competent authorities of the member states. If it is well implemented and applied, it will contribute to better patient care and efficient health systems. I think there's one chance that we have before us. It's the European Commission's draft regulation for European health data space. I think this is another field where using electronic health data has a huge potential, not only for the treatment of patients, but also for further developing our health systems. And here again, we need to find the balance of cooperation and exchange on the one hand, and respecting the responsibility of member states to shape their healthcare systems. I think it's worth looking at fields where we can and should cooperate, and I think there are fields enough without disturbing the national level regulations.
Thank you. This is, again, another 90 minutes worth of discussion, of course, but this is very well summarized. Thank you very much, Doris. Benoit, I think you're next. Final thoughts on cooperation moving forward.
Merci. Mais donc, très rapidement.
Thank you. Well, I think that this session demonstrated that we had more common challenges than different challenges. Same for the tools. So collaboration must be based not so much on a joint negotiation, but rather on working together on implementation tools, HTA, therapeutic advances, etc. So Belgium is a small country. So the good thing is that nobody is afraid of Belgium. And this is why we were able to initiate a certain number of collaboration initiatives, Benelux A and Horizon Scanning, for example. So my message here is that our door is open to all European countries who are interested in sharing our initiatives, because there is not much international horizon scanning in Europe. So I think that what we have implemented is one of the major ones in Europe, and we are open to collaborating with more countries, especially in terms of the method. And also, we are always asking for more collaboration. I heard that Thomas was talking about the link between the French Medication Agency and the CNAM. Right now, we are currently redesigning our administration in Belgium. We have the Ministry of Health, INAMI, and the Medication Agency, which have been put together in one same building. And we also work on joint projects. So I would be interested in seeing how the Medication Agency was put together with the payers and social security to be stronger together internally in each country. So I think that there are a lot of projects. We have more challenges in common than separate. So I think that we should get together.
Open is a prerequisite, I think, but it's also a matter of reaching out through the door and actually grabbing everyone else who wants to work with you. So I think this is an important point. Thank you, Benoit. Thomas, over to you.
Two things, very different things. First of all, we are available. We want to go further in sharing best practices, in understanding how countries solve these problems that they have. We understand that we should work together. We are available to do that. Our door is open too. And as Sylvain said, I think it's very important, even as paying authority, payer, my main wish would be that the industrial European policy to support healthcare industry in Europe should be reinforced, because this is also the prerequisite for the discussions to take place. You know, it's very difficult to have those discussions about medication pricing and the industry. And I think that that could be a game changer, because it would be a good way to support innovation, to support investment, to support technology, to support entrepreneurship in many countries. And it would show to the pharmaceutical labs that Europe is willing to welcome them, not only because it offers friendly prices, but also because it builds an ecosystem that is favorable to employment, to jobs, to research, to production, industrial manufacturing. It's not just a discussion among payers, which of course will be limited by the constraints that we all know, but it's also for Europe to continue developing its industrial policy in pharmaceutical industry, that is.
Point to include in the concluding round, to think about it in a more holistic way. And I think this idea of robust innovation systems in Europe is exactly what we have been talking about. Ruth, we come to you. I think in your introductory speech you had some ideas of collaboration that went a little bit beyond what we've been discussing, like, for example, equity-based differential pricing. Having heard the discussion the past 90 minutes, what would be your closing reflections for today?
Well, I think very quickly, I do think there's scope for increasing collective action in horizon scanning, evaluation and appraisal. I think the HTA, the collective HTA is a great step forward, but we still have a lot of capacity, I think, to move forward with collective negotiation and procurement. As you mentioned, the other aspect of collaboration is solidarity, recognising that ability to pay varies across Europe, so it's not unreasonable. Prices should vary with ability to pay, but should be determined according to value to the payer. That means we have to find ways of discouraging arbitrage. Parallel trade has its place, but it does not always serve us well. It's simply not rational for higher income countries in Europe to take advantage of prices in lower income settings. So going back to the greater collaboration, I understand the concerns about national sovereignty and understanding the differences in the healthcare systems of the European member states, but I don't think that precludes a far greater degree of collective action, of collaboration and evaluation and appraisal, and even in negotiation and procurement. As I said, I think there's a lot of scope to take that forward. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And I'll just pick up on the last thing you said. There's a lot of room to take this forward. I think this group, where we have representation of the payers, is really a key group, and probably the one summarizing sentence from the entire afternoon is there are opportunities for collaboration. There are platforms also from the European framework. Moving forward, let's use them more and see how we can harness the experience from the past years, including the COVID-19 experience, to ensure that we have good access to affordable medicines moving forward. Thank you all very much for joining us here, for our speakers, also to our audience. And to those who joined us online. And I think we leave you for a little bit of a break before the last roundtable at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Bonjour à tous, donc bienvenue pour cette dernière table ronde de cette conférence.
Welcome to the last roundtable, how to reduce social competitiveness by promoting fair mobility. Now, to answer this question, we have the good fortune to have Gabriel Bischoff with us. Gabriel, you're an MEP from Germany, and you're also the rapporteur in terms of coordination regulation. We also have David Dion, head of the Unity for Regulation at the European Union as well. Mathilde Minot, economist at the School of Economics for Paris, Bruno Bepeau, You are a general counsellor at the National Office for Social Security in Belgium, and Bruno Grégoire, you are Director of European Affairs, International Affairs at the URSAF. So, LEWS, I'm going to moderate this roundtable. And until recently, I was in charge of international relations and also director of the higher studies for social affairs studies, and now I'm a lawyer. So with our panelists, we're going to look at various questions. I'm going to try and put our session into context. Now, in terms of the introduction, I would like to talk about the success of this principle of coordination of the social security system. So this is already mentioned in the Rome Treaty of 57, and then there's been various regulations, 71, 2004, and now we are reviewing some of these, but the principles in themselves have changed very little, with the exception to the rule in terms of applying the law of the country for temporary workers. So these different forms of mobility have evolved a lot. Teleworking as well has become very present during the crisis, and also we've seen another major evolution, because this principle of coordination, initially it was focused on mobility for workers, which was supposed to guarantee mobility and while people should maintain their rights, and then the DGE also began to focus on the world of companies and free service provision. So in terms of that particular context, we're going to try and make a diagnosis with facts and figures, and we're going to come to this issue of reviewing the coordination regulation, and then we should also look at the issue of cooperation that works. And so we have a good example of successful cooperation between France and Belgium, based on trust, and we'll try and see what the different characteristics of that successful cooperation is. And then you'll see digitalization. We've seen this in previous conference. Digitalization is also at the heart of all these different matters. And to finish with, we will dwell on that particular matter. So let's start with this issue of a diagnosis. So David, do you want to quickly tell us where we're at in terms of these temporary modules? So thank you, Elisa. Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to come back home to Paris. Now, before I bombard you with figures, and I think that Mathilde remembers all of these, just a reminder, these are regulations that are older than we are, so they go back to 1958, so the first political regulations of European construction. So now the first regulation was the issue of the languages in institutions. So the first political regulations was coordination of social security systems. So then we had legislations, other kind of legislation, and different times. So this issue then of statistics. So there's an article in the regulation 1991 which states that there is a duty for member states to collect data, to share that data, and it's up to the Commission to publish that data. So this is the good news. And I can tell you how this collection is done. What's not so good is that, unfortunately, not all countries provide the same level of information. So in terms of the diagnosis, it's important to qualify diagnosis. Yes, there is a process which happens every year. Every year we publish about 10 different statistical reports on quality, and this allows us to have a vision which is quite clear of the previous year in the different branches of social security. Regulations cover all the different branches of social security, and also there are a number of processes. So the issues concerning healthcare, family benefit, unemployment, retirement, also payments and applicable legislation. So I think that this is a point which is important for you. So now every year we publish these statistical reports, and the last one that we published a couple of days ago, and I would urge you to look at this on the internet site if you have the opportunity to see all the details that were obtained from the previous year. What's interesting is that what we published so it's a report for 2020 during the pandemic, and this allows us to make a distinction with the previous period, 2019. So if you look at some figures, I would say that it's quite marked that there was a clear impact of the pandemic. Now, before I bombard you with the figures, I want to start with one particular figure. Do you know how many European sickness insurance cards exist around the European Union? Do you know? Julia? Million, 10 million, 100 million, 240 million. 240 million European insurance cards. So that means about half the European population has one of these European cards. And that is something which is very good, because if you have the opportunity to cross the border, you should keep this card on you. Another figure is the A1 document. Now, the figures there are interesting, and I think that Mathilde will talk a bit more about this than me. I just want to give you a quick idea. Let's go back to 2010. We were all much younger and more dynamic. The figures for PDA1 is 1 million, 1.2. That was in 2010. In 2019, they went to 4.5 million. 4.5 million, that covers the document A1 under Article 2, which is detachment, and then Article 13, which concerns plural activities. So a strong increase then. 2020, there was a drop because of the pandemic, teleworking, confinement, etc. And so that figure went down to 3.8 million. And for very good reasons. So now, once again, these figures, and keep these in mind for the document A1 and Article 12 between 2010 and 2020. So those figures have gone up 2.5 times. For several activities, that's been multiplied by 8. So the reasons for this then, and perhaps Mathilde will know more about this than I do, one of the reasons is that there is a business model that was created in terms of these transporter workers, and also there was also a strict application of rules. The European Commission, with the Administrative Commission, which belongs to the Commission, over the years has reminded us of the rules, and we've seen that in some countries there's been an increase, a strong increase in terms of the demand for PDA, what we call PDA, and so I perhaps should stop there. Just a last couple of words in terms of statistics. In other fields, unemployment, health, retirement, the figures are quite stable for this particular period. A slight increase, and this is normal because, of course, mobility has increased over the last 20 years. But what is important is that if you see these mobile workers, they contribute, of course, to the social security systems. And what's interesting to note is that their contribution as a mobile worker is higher than the service or the benefits that they have. So this is important to point that out. So there is a kind of benefit in terms of mobility for countries, for institutions as well. Thank you. Thank you, David, because we don't want just figures, so we want to look at what's behind the figures. This might lead to some disagreement. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Mathilde, so your study has been mentioned. This study is ongoing, measuring international mobility for work and its redistributive effects. So in terms of what David said, perhaps you can add some information. You can draw the first lessons from this. Sorry, we can't hear the speaker. Thank you for the invitation to react to what David said on statistics on imported workers. So what you need to keep in mind is that for a very long period it was very difficult to quantify this type of work, and because we didn't have the right data at a European level. And so we just used Formula 1 with the directive of 2014 and other directives from various national administrations. We have more data, microeconomic data, which is collected in France or in Belgium, which is collected by the IRNSS, and we make this available to the researchers. So now, today, we have a much better view of these figures and what that actually means for the labor market in different countries. Now, starting with this data, I think there are two important facts which emerge and which are important when it comes to this redistributive effect. The first is so the success of this international mobility, which so we have companies that provide service in member states, and this has led to mobility of some workers. So we have a doubling of the number of mobile actors over the last couple of years. For France, we've got about 20,000 assignments, and that was just for 2020. So a big increase then. So what the data allows us to say is that there are three main factors which would explain this increase in mobile workers in Europe. The first factor is the enlargement in 2004 and then 2007, 2013. So we can see that in the data. So for delivering international services to companies in the new member states was used a lot by these mobile workers, and today almost 40% of the flows that come from the Eastern European countries that just represent 20% of total employment in Europe. So there's been a big take-up by European countries for these mobile workers, and that explains the big increase in these flows. The second factor, crisis 2008, the fact that this crisis in 2008 had two major impacts. The first was an increase of offerings for mobile workers in southern countries where there was a lot of unemployment. Portugal, Spain, Italy started using these mobile workers, and also there was a global strategy for companies in high-cost countries, France, Austria, for example, to optimize cost by outsourcing work. And so since 2008, 2010, there was a lot of this mobile work. And the third factor is using these workers by companies. So mobile working was used by some major companies in France with Saint-Nazaire. So there was very little mobility in the beginning, but then gradually over the years, the subcontractors and companies working with they started using this business model, and so we had this new way of organizing work, providing these international services. So that was the first factor. So I hope I've explained that sufficiently. The second thing that you need to keep in mind, are those flows significant for the labor market, and should we be afraid of this type of mobile working? So this is currently the ported workers is about it's quite a low percentage, but it's very important nevertheless if we compare this to international mobility, which is traditional. So you have twice as many mobile workers than traditional workers. So a strong contribution so in terms of the international labor market. Now, if it's 1% of total jobs, and if we focus on some sectors and some market sectors, mobile workers are very important. So 35% of flows go for construction, and ported workers represent 20% of domestic workers in a country like Belgium. And in the same way, if you start looking at some departments, some municipalities, you'll see that the importance of mobile workers is very strong. So this is where we create the redistributive effect. In a country like France, some departments use many more mobile workers than others, and the impact of this international competition can reach 20%. Thank you, Mathilde and David. So these figures say an awful lot about the situation, but we will come back to this. We don't have all the figures, but we'll have a clearer vision of things, of this cross-border phenomenon. But anyway, this is a situation which is well documented by these figures, and it should enlighten the decision makers. So Gabrielle, can you tell us what the main points in terms of reviewing the regulations, the coordination regulations are, and what are the obstacles between the Parliament and the Council? We said that this has been blocked since 2016. There's been no true revision. What's happening? What's going on there?
Thank you very much, and also thank you for the invitation to this beautiful room. To be back here is good, and also during the time of the French presidency, because they can play an important role to unblock this directive, and I would just like to emphasize this as a starting point, and I think therefore it's good that we are sitting here and discussing the issue. Indeed, I joined the Parliament in 2019, and when I came to the Parliament, it was explained why this so important directive, and I think David Dion said it, it's the mother of all social regulation in Europe. It's one of the first, it's very important, and it's updated since the 50s when the world changes, we have new challenges, we have to adapt the regulation to make it fitting and proper and up to date. And there the task was to say, can we unblock this directive that was negotiated in a trilogue for a long time, and just before the European election in the Council did not get a majority, this compromise that was worked on. A lot of work was put into this. So our first analysis was there are maybe 80%, but a huge part that was negotiated where there is a compromise is not contested very much. So the first important step, what we did is to say, okay, we focus on the three most complicated points that in the end caused the problems. And this is on one hand the export of unemployment benefits. And we have heard here also we can see the need for improvement because the number of posted workers is increasing. We also have what we think is not a fair burden sharing. People are contributing to the social security systems and everyone wants to have them. But when it comes to the social rights of this person and in, for example, in a situation here of unemployment, to export it, some countries get really tight on this issue. So we try to find compromises here, and I think we did find in the end, in the negotiation, a good one, moved into the direction of the Council to say, okay, we will go from 3 months to 6 months for everyone. We already have a reality that many member states are already providing 6 months in reality. But we will say who paid in longer in the social security systems and exports will get also longer benefits. To say this is something to come to terms with the Council, and this was developed and discussed. David Dion was also participating in the trilogue during the German presidency to mind the gap between the two institutions and to come to a compromise. We have, and it was mentioned here in the two presentations, the prior notification and the PDA1. And also here, I think we did find a compromise then during the Slovenian presidency and everyone agrees that this is very important also because on one hand we want to provide a fair mobility and also want to prevent social dumping and also business models that are based on this. So also here we worked on a compromise to make sure that especially in the critical sectors, and we heard it, the construction sector alone is 35%, that we say in the construction sector we need really strict regulation, but in other sectors we will make it possible if it was not able before and in a certain time frame also to sort of post-notify. But it was also, I talked a lot to the employers and the trade unions in this sector, and both sides were very, very pushing for to leave and have a strong, strict prior notification here. And we as the parliament, maybe my colleague also, Dragos Pislaro, who is now the chair of the employment committee, but is also a shadow in this negotiation, we push together very much for a stronger digitalization of these processes, because for me it is not understandable, maybe this is a good opportunity to discuss it, why it is so complex to have fast and digital solution in real-time exchange of information. That would make a lot of the problems here obsolete. And the third point, it was also mentioned here, is the question of pluriactivity, that we have people that permanently work in different member states at the same time, a number that is increasing, and where we wanted to make sure we have to know where the social contribution is paid, and also to make sure that we don't create new business models around here, to have a regime shopping in a way. And also here we did come to an agreement, at least with the Slovenian presidency and with a lot of member states. But you know the results. We were very hopeful that finally we would give all mobile workers in Europe the message on one hand to say, we care for you, we improve the situation, we take on board the new developments, and on the other hand to the companies to say we make things easier. For example, we excluded all business trips in this compromise from any notification OA1, and with more willingness for digitalization they would also profit, because we still think in the parliament that if in the council an agreement is not possible anymore on how to create fair mobility and a fair burden sharing, I think this would be a very bad signal, because anyway, I think free movement is under debate. It's one of the assets, but it needs good, appropriate and fair regulation. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Gabrielle. Ce sera intéressant.
Thank you. So it'd be interesting to see the reaction from the Commission, but perhaps we do that. Let's look at the practitioners of social security. Bruno, do you want to react to this? Thank you for this opportunity. This is a dream to be here and also to give the point of view from the point of the practitioner. So I'm not here as a politician, so that means that the objectives, but I'm here as a practitioner. So we apply the rules, and also we issue the A1 documents, and we also intervene in terms of communication with companies, people, etc. We produce newsletters, so we do a bit of everything. And moreover, in Belgium, the health professionals, the consultants, the academics, they're also very active internationally or transnational level in terms of our decisions, our interpretations are not often contested, but sometimes we're asked to justify a point of view. So that means that they do collaborate a lot with us, so we kind of they try to decide what the limit is. Should it be interpreted like this or like that? So it's trying to establish the legal limits. So this is why that changes to our basic legislation. Well, we monitor those changes very closely, and to prepare this conference, I organized an overview and I listed all the different changes that have taken place, because we always talk about the latest contested points, but I found 8 changes in terms of the basic regulation and 27 changes in the application regulation. So that hides an awful lot of things. And I can see that some points say, well, okay, that's really very good, but there are an awful lot of rules where I am asking these questions. Well, good God, how are we going to apply this particular rule? So I understand that the objective behind the regulation, which can be quite excellent, so there's no discussion there, but perhaps it's not the easiest way to do things in practice. So the objective in terms of resources, because every time we refuse or reject a request for mobility, we have to justify this, and we have to provide arguments and justify a point of view. So in some cases, it would be very difficult to do that. And moreover, in Belgium, national legislation or legislative text always has an interpretative text. So this explains things, which is much easier. So now for what the regulation is basically the text. You just have the text, which is the result of a compromise, and which generally doesn't have an explicatory text that explains it. So often it's coherent, but sometimes it excludes a lot of heterogeneous. So I'm talking about the construction sector, but also what we call the high potential. So young, mobile people who want to acquire knowledge in IT sectors. So this is very different from the metalworking sector. So there's a whole the whole host of difficulties and discussions. Why does a company detach workers or post workers, and why do they call on other companies that do that? So there's no single reason for that. It's not just about money, but there's a whole host of different reasons, and depending on the sector. So you can have one reason is more important than another. So I think that this reviewing this regulation is a good idea, but if you look at this in detail, it's very, very tricky. Okay, we'll look at that in a moment. So this point of view from the ground is very important. Bruno, can you add to that? Well, I agree entirely. In terms of the objectives of reviewing this regulation, there are political objectives where we question the framework, but we have to take into account the fact that the world has changed a lot since the last dialogue. We had the pandemic, and then the widespread use of teleworking. And this isn't included in the regulations because before teleworking didn't really exist, but now it's become the new normal in many companies. And then we have the war in Ukraine with millions of refugees who've come onto the labor market. So this is a labor force ready to do anything to find a job, and this may have a negative effect in terms of how some companies behave. So interpretation, applying these rules is very complex to do, but we do have some instruments to help us with this, to interpret and apply this. So these are the recommendations from the administrative committees, so the administrative commission. The last time that was almost 30 years ago, and the last decision was taken 5 years ago. So as I said, the world has changed greatly since that era. So it's important to look at the rules and what actually happens in reality. So from the point of view of the commission, David, can you enlighten us? So because you have the freedom to do so.
On vous entend pas bien. Voilà.
En ce qui concerne la révision des...
In terms of revising the regulations, I don't have much to add. European Commission departments, of course, are there to support the Council and the Parliament in order to find solutions. Unfortunately, there was an unexpected failure in December. And so it is now going to be for the French presidency of the Council to restart the negotiations with the European Parliament. And as our Commissioner says, the European Commission will be there to support, to facilitate, to moderate, as was the case during the negotiations, to come up with ideas or improvements. But of course, basically, it's for the two legislators to do that. So, as Madame Bischoff said, 80, 90%, maybe more, has already been approved. It's a lot. But what remains is highly sensitive. Is it impossible? We don't think so. We are convinced that effort should be coming from both sides in order to be able to come to a positive end to this negotiation. If it's not the case under the French presidency, it will be the case under the Czech presidency, and if not, Swedish presidency. Well, that's fine. But, you know, Europe has already experienced long negotiations on a certain number of proposals, so we are ready for that. But we think that we do have a potential for a quick agreement. Then there was the question of telework, working from home during and post-pandemic. On the side of the European Commission, when we go back to March 2020, so that's the beginning of the pandemic, we invited the Administrative Commission to come up with a guidance for the pandemic period. And a guidance was approved by the Administrative Commission, which enabled national institutions of the countries to agree on a certain number of practices that enable them to manage this very special situation and to not go on changing the law constantly, to have some stability. Now, luckily, this period is supposed to come to an end because that was the pandemic period. And last year, in June, during the meeting of the Administrative Commission, I said to the Administrative Commission, the pandemic is still there, it's going to stop at some point. So we have to start thinking about the aftermath of the pandemic, given the working conditions that we have observed and the models that we have seen, especially in remote work, etc. So we had a first discussion last week at the Administrative Commission. There was another one recently that Bruno was involved in. And the fact came out clear that we have to come up with a post-pandemic period. And so we are going to do this. We are going to start discussing with a certain number of countries who are willing to take the leadership of that, so that at the end of June, in the framework of this new situation, we can have a guidance that will cover the cases. And the regulations cover flexibility. In the framework of Article 13 or 12 or 16, there are possibilities. So we have to see what's feasible. During the discussion that we had 2 or 3 weeks ago, some delegations, including Bruno's, mentioned a certain number of possibilities. So we kept on working on those points, and I'm happy that the Administrative Commission reacted positively to the need to work together on this new issue very soon. Thank you, David. It's important. Optimism as to the fast adoption of this revised version with new legal or administrative tools such as this guidance document, which would enable us to address exceptional situations, which I'm sure will come up. Mathilde, maybe you wanted to respond to that? Do you think we are going to be able to fit all the situations in the rules? Well, maybe I can give you the statistical approach to tell you what are the empirical rules which seem to rule on posting of workers. Maybe the question of tax and social differences, which I think is something that we're talking about today, and also the bargaining power of employees. We know today that increasing the cost difference, which is linked to the difference of social contributions in the countries. If we increase this difference by 1%, you increase the seconding rate of 1%. So this mismatch means that you would have non-cooperative behaviors in terms of taxing the work and the cost of work, because you would give competitive edge to the low-cost countries. And this is something which is important in quantity and which has been verified by data. On top of that, apart from the differences in social contributions on salaries, which will always be there in Europe because there's no harmonization in our pay systems, we also have the price of labor and of work in all European countries and how labor law impacts the fixing of salaries. Low-cost countries are not cheaper because they have lower salaries, but it's because they have less bargaining power for the same skills. Today in France, for example, what we know is that for equal work in terms of skills, age, and characteristics, a posted worker will get 30% less than the same French worker and 15% less than a French temporary worker. So this has nothing to do with the tax differences. It's just explained by the potential bargaining power of workers. And I think that this means that the lawmakers should not only look at the tax level and the tax rate, but also the role of regulation in the way salaries are fixed and regulated, and make sure that the regulation would protect posted workers sufficiently so that they can bring the fruit of their labor back home, just as local workers would. And I think that the new negotiations goes in the right direction because it applies the same type of rules in terms of protecting posted workers and domestic workers working for the same company. And so the objective now is going to make sure that this regulation will be properly implemented and improve the bargaining power of these posted workers and match it with the domestic workers' bargaining power. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very good addition to the picture that we have. There's another important point, which is fair cooperation and confidence among social security institutions. I would like to look at an example of successful cooperation between Belgium and France. Maybe you can describe how you do it and tell us how you set up the conditions for trust. Bruno. Well, I'll go first because we asked for that. We asked for advice and support from our Belgian friends because, you know, as a public authority, we decided to reorganize the way we manage international mobility. And we wanted to put this in the hands of one entity for salaried and non-salaried workers. So the ministry wanted us to have a single tool that would be as digital as possible. Well, so it's a 100% digital tool with onboard controls and checks, calculation algorithms that would take all the calculation methods that we had, making all the paperwork easier and simpler for companies, based on the principle of say it once, you know, all the principles which are currently promoted by the European Commission. So we thought, okay, we have Belgium who has a pretty good management tool already, so why not call them to create our tool? We also have to say that we worked in agile mode. Now, what is that? Well, that is when you work on the skills aspect. You look at the needs in skills, you look at the needs of companies, you look at the needs of the managing authorities, and you work with the technical services also in parallel. And based on that, we were able to come up with the solutions. We designed the solutions with deliverables, and we did that with advice from our Belgian friends. So it's very much inspired from their tool for the management of international mobility. It shows that cooperation based on trust and common work and benchmarking and sharing of best practices is something that works. Of course, it takes time. It takes a little bit of time at the beginning, of course, because you have to understand each other. And the good thing is that we do speak the same language, which is a good start. But also, you save a lot of time afterwards because we started from scratch. We started drafting our project to manage international mobility 3 years ago, and it took us 2 years to actually reorganize the system, create a center to manage international mobility, and to put online the new tool for international mobility management. It took us 2 years. So it takes a great investment, of course. Member states and institutions have to be willing to invest resources in that. But working with our Belgian friends was very useful for us, and we are willing to share our experience with whoever, with any member state who would be interested. Bruno, did you want to add something? Absolutely. For us, what was the starting point here? If somebody was to ask me what was for you the key element in terms of cross-border labor, I would say the key word was confidence, legal security. David, you just gave the perfect example. You know, there was the pandemic. The big problem was, what are we going to do with that? We had this concept of force majeure, but everybody reacted to it in a different way. The European Commission and the Administrative Commission ended up with a common interpretation which enabled us, administrations, to inform our audience or public, the civil society, in a clear way, saying, okay, if you do this, you will get this as a result, with very specific dates. Second thing which is very important for us, we are not an island. You know, our customers, they work cross-border, of course, and so it wouldn't make sense if Belgium says something, then people would go to France, and then in France people would interpret the same concept in a different way. So for us, it's very important to have common and clear interpretations. For example, what David said was the perfect, clear example which made it possible for us to do that. Now, in that approach, in 2001, so that's 21 years ago, the first draft of our tool was online. To deliver the A1 saw the light of day, and the idea was that companies need to have legal security as soon as possible. So we were faced with two problems, two issues, two contradictory objectives. The European objective, the European Court of Justice that says, oh, Belgium, watch out. You can only deliver the document after an in-depth inspection in order to ensure the accuracy of the documents. And on the other hand, we have companies or direct customers who say, oh my God, I need the document tomorrow because it's going to go to France and then there's going to be problems, or the person is posted in Germany and the German client will not let us come on the site if we don't have the A1 document. So faced with this double objective, we said, okay, there's only one way to go about this. Apart from having a 200-person department, it will be to digitize. And we were very lucky because we had a lot of databases, underlying databases actually, about employers and the working contracts, working relationships, workers, etc. And this is how we could come up with the tool whose first version was published, as I said, in 2001. Well, of course, the French were clever because it took us more than 20 years to get where we are at now. And they benefited from that. You know, Bruno says, oh, we did this in 3 years. Well, yes, of course they did, because it took us 20 years beforehand. And we learned a lot. We went for over-digitization, under-digitization. We tried a little bit of everything. And we paid to learn, as we say. So, of course, the project is now in a very good shape. And now the clever French guys come in and say, oh, okay, we're going to take that. So the final result is actually mixed feelings on our part. Why do we have mixed feelings? Well, because we were so proud. We thought we have the best tool in Europe. But now I must say that not only did they take up all our good ideas, but I must say, after seeing the demonstration of the French system, that, wow, it's better than ours. It is much more modern, it's more user-friendly. So actually, now we have to go back to France to study, to look at what they've done and to get our inspiration from that. But no kidding, for us, it was the ideal experience. It was true collaboration, which means that, France for us was not a pleasant country. They had all those primary branches for social security, etc. Now they have a centralized organization so that you have this legal security. You can say, okay, no problem. Legally, we're safe. We're on the same page. So it's an excellent example that was, of course, positive for social security authority and probably tax authorities as well, because I'm sure that there were a lot of savings that were achieved there. And also, it was an advance in Europe. In Belgium, we have a very open economy. We are very much in favor of cross-border work, of course. And I think that these initiatives should be used as best in class. Thank you, Bruno. We'll go back to you, Bruno, but it's true that it's very interesting to listen to what you have to say. Gabrielle, you said that you wished for more sharing of information among countries, among social security institutions. We see that here there are two keywords, confidence and legal safety or security. So how do you consider this as an MEP? How do you think we could unlock this even more through digitization? How can we make our projects even more agile in order to exchange data for more simplification and better efficiency in our systems?
I think Bruno de Paul knows a lot what I have done and we have done in the Parliament, because we thought if countries are able to do it, some and others are not, can we make this example better known in Europe? So we organized events where the Belgian colleagues could present their Limosa system. We even did it in Germany because I thought Germany would need a huge push also in digitalization. And I think there is a lot of interest, and it's important indeed that you have digital solutions that work in some countries. I don't think that copy and paste, if it would be that easy, I think everyone would have it. But that is not possible. But I think it sets incentives to develop such a digitalization, because I also, David might not like to hear it anymore, but in all the hearings I always say, why are we able in no time with COVID to develop an app where even, I use the example, I was vaccinated in Germany and in France, and in no time, in 1 minute, in my German app that it used all over Europe, is secure. With the QR code, I am fully vaccinated and I have proof of this, and it can be checked in every country. I go to a restaurant in Paris, not anymore here, but in most countries it's still, they check if you are vaccinated and it works. So I think this is a good example. I know also in terms of data protections there are challenges, but it is possible. I wanted to highlight also 2 points. I think the pandemic did teach us a lot. It taught us that the first reaction was really national. There was no European thinking at all. Borders were closed. Every country did it different. There was no information even in the same region that it would be done or how it would be done. One lesson, I think we learned that we need to change this, and I'm sure if a new pandemic would hit, we would do it different. But most of the countries, especially the countries that block in the Council this question of more export, because they would have to pay more. These countries realized overnight how dependent they are on the cross-border workers. They paid them a hotel accommodation for every night just to stay and to keep the hospitals running, the supermarkets running, the transport working. And I think this also opened a bit the horizon, I think, for these also dependencies that we have in certain sectors. And in one thing, it's a good thing that we have this European labor markets. But here, and I would agree totally that we need good and clear legislation. But I would like to warn at this point from my experience that if we add on another complex issue like telework to the negotiation, that this would help to facilitate and find a compromise in due time. And I also think that with telework, we also have regulation on telework, that it has much more aspects than social security. Tax policies, a lot of aspects. I think we need to tackle it, but I would say in this moment, we have three very complex, sensitive issues on the table. Let's try to find a solution here, and I think I explained how much the Parliament moved into the direction of the Council. And a willingness also from the Member States to go for a compromise. A compromise always means that both sides have to move here. But I think also if you look at the empirical data, and the Commission provided it again, for example, most workers, especially cross-border workers, pay a long time in the social security systems of the Member States. And if you look at the unemployment rate, it's not higher than from the native country workers. And I think it would be very good if the empirical data, where I was surprised when I took over the negotiation, and how few data is there. I thought, Jesus, we are counting how many mirrors on tractors we produce in Europe, but we really don't really know, because we only have the A1 for giving us information, really how many workers are posted in reality. We just take the A1, and from this we think we know what it is. But I think this is also important, that we have good data and that we have an empirical approach here to come to a solution. And this was something that also the Parliament always pushed for. And one thing more for the future, I think also this question of a European social security number, in my view, and that is for the future, could be a good solution. And the woman is not there anymore, but she referred to the proposals of the citizens in the Conference on the Future of Europe on health and social security. They are much more pushy. They also push for European solutions. For example, if you have high mobile worker that work a lot in other countries. But this for me are the expectations for the future. They are also important, but first step would be, let's find a compromise here on this phase, and then we go to the next ones. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour ces points très riches.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. This is very informative. I would like to ask David to respond to that, because Gabrielle said how she marveled at this pass that was that was working so well between the countries. How come we don't have a card that shows our social security rights everywhere in Europe? You said you were talking about European social security number or card. Well, we do have cards, but there's no data in those cards. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? I can tell you about that. Of course, I don't want to give you too many acronyms, because I did that with numbers already. So, you know, it's good that the organizer says no PowerPoint presentation. Well, I'm a bad student. I'm the bad guy here, so I have a PowerPoint presentation. So can you put it up on the screen? The only thing I wanted to present is this, and I will be glad to give you this slide in the end if you wish. I wanted to highlight the instruments which are available in Europe right now or in the next years to come for social security. Now, we have four systems, I would say, which you have to try to imagine. The first system is called Portail numérique unique in French. It's the single digital gateway. It's actually an obligation. Before the end of 2023, all member states will have to apply that to make it available for citizens to handle a certain number of procedures online. One of those procedures is document A1, PDA1, and the social security card, meaning that before the end of next year, all the countries will have to make it possible for their citizens and companies to fill in a request online for the documents and to obtain them online. So I think that this is the first point. This is what you have on the left-hand side here. It's a single digital gateway. That's the first process. It's not specific to Social Security, but Social Security benefits from that with PDA1 and the European Social Security card. Then the second one is called EESSI, Electronic Something for Social Security Information. It's something that's provided in the regulation. It should have started in 2010 or 12. It was delayed. It was delayed a lot before it was actually up and running for a certain number of reasons. If you have 2 hours ahead of you, I could tell you all about these reasons, but unfortunately, I guess you don't. So what's happening is that for the past 2 or 3 years, countries have started accessing the system. When I say countries, it's the 27 member states, but it's also the 4 members of the European Free Trade Agreement and the UK. So all the countries logged onto the system, and they started to exchange information through the system, information about you. When you go abroad for work or to live abroad, there are a certain number of administrative procedures that you have to carry out. A1, U1, U2, S1, S2 documents, P1, P2, etc. So all these procedures generate a certain number of administrative work, which for a long time was managed in paper or by email or etc. And so now you have it in the EESSI. It's a secure system with a certain number of harmonized procedures. And from what I heard from the member states who have started to use it, they are very pleased at how fast the information is processed, and they consider it's very beneficial in terms of time and therefore in terms of cost. That's the good news. 32 countries are connected there. More good news, you have 99 procedures, and out of the 99 procedures, you have 10 countries who can manage them all in the EESSI. 10 out of 32. About 20 countries can process 95% of the procedures. 4 countries are a little bit behind. It's Slovakia, Greece, the Netherlands and Switzerland. They are way, way behind, and they can only manage 60 or 70% of the procedures on that system. It is very time consuming. Why is it the case? Well, why did it take us 12 years before the majority of countries would be able to use the system and exchange data on the system? Well, because some countries did not obtain the funds to be active and proactive enough to move forward with the system. I think that someone said this morning. In some countries, social security spend is about 30% of the GDP. But when it comes to coordination of social security systems, of course, that's only one group of population which is much smaller. So maybe it's not the priority, and therefore it doesn't get the funds. But things are going on. David, you have 1 minute left. Oh, well, then this is going to be the last box here on the right. That what it is that we're working on is called ESPAS, ESSPAS. It sounds very well in French, not so much in German. I'm sorry about that, but it's procedures between citizens and institutions. EESSI is between institutions. Citizens don't see that. They're not active in that, but the citizens are faced with a certain number of administrative things that they have to do. Can we digitize that? We think we can. Same spirit as the single digital gateway. So the idea would be to digitize those procedures, European card, S1, S2, P1, etc., and to have a check digital check in real time. That is the people who have to check if the data on a portable document like the ones we have now is the right one. They can do it in real time. This requires interoperability between all the systems. Technically, it's feasible. I think that probably my colleagues will comment that it's feasible because the tests have been carried out, but it takes some political determination to make sure that more countries than Italy, France, and Germany, because those three countries have started to use a blockchain system and that type of technology, to get other countries on board, to get other countries to invest in that, so that what we could do for the COVID pass in a few months could also be done for social security. Maybe it's not the same level of emergency, of course. Maybe it's not a life or death matter here, but if the political determination is there, I'm sure that we'll be able to do it. And we should be able to do this in a few months or a few years' time. Thank you, David. I think we're going to have to get to our conclusion, but in just 2 minutes, Bruno and Bruno as a duet. And Mathilde, can you tell us how you feel as practitioners in terms of this project, in terms of digitization, in 2 minutes each? About digitization, I'm in favor. That's absolutely not a question, but you know, about A1 delivery, we committed ourselves to deliver a certain number of digital A1 certificates or A1 documents. We also respect guidelines from the Administrative Commission on the coding for A1. We have even created a QR code on each A1 document so that any member state, any person who wants to check the authenticity of A1 can use it. The QR code will take them directly on the website where they can have all the essential and main data, because of course there's the GDPR, so you have to comply with GDPR, but you have all the information about the posted person. Then ESS space, that's complementary. The objective is to have a digital portfolio for citizens. Instead of having a paper thing or a PDF thing, you would have it in a digital form. And we were involved in the feasibility study of the concept, and it works. That's the big news of today. The concept works. Of course, you have to match that with the needs in the field. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done in that area, but it works. Bruno, maybe, would you like to confirm that EESC has reached all the agents? They're all using it? Yes, absolutely. So it was also for us a big challenge because we had already the system dating back from 2001, and we had to make the right connections with the EESC. So when we designed something new, it was immediately adapted to the new reality, so that's good, because we were able to adapt the existing tools. And in the end, we managed to do it. Is it perfect? No, not yet. Are there benefits? Yes, absolutely. And we're still learning as we go. And that's the story, because we have a little bit of a problem with Germany. Some of the agreements never arrived, and then somebody says, what are you doing with that? We said, we've sent it. It's your problem if you haven't received it. And so at the end of the day, there was an attachment to a message, and we were not supposed to do that, and so that was blocking the whole thing. So it's all very nice, this digital thing, but we also have to learn, and we have to keep on learning how to use it properly. And I have to say that I'm a big fan of this document that was just put up on the screen, because this document shows everything. You've got everything. On the left, you've got the gateway, and then you've got communication among institutions, and then you've got communication with the interested parties. The only thing I would like to say, it's a criticism, is that the middle and the right here is where you've got a lot of European focus, and the one on the left, which is actually the starting point, well, it seems that it was a private initiative, basically. And so we worked on that thing, and then France called us. But it was the very beginning, and I would like to finish with what I started with, that is confidence, trust. What is one of the main problems among the States, which makes everything so political. It's the lack of confidence, because we do see that quite a few countries issue A1 documents which have an incredible binding force, but they are not capable of ensuring the accuracy of information in the document. How many times do we have to ask for specific details because the information was not accurate? So this is huge, and I think it's a pity that we put so much of emphasis on exchanging and digitizing the document or the whatever, and not sufficient to the very origin. The origin, I mean, member states, do your job and invest as governments in invest in staff and in IT to make sure that the documents that you issue will generate trust in other countries. You know, for France, it was night and day, because we now know how it works, and we know at which level the A1 as a product is can be trusted.
So yes, the tool can't do anything. So Mathilde, you have the closing words. So I just wanted to react to what Bruno said for us concerning all the different projects that are ongoing and the pre-requirements. We have to make sure of the conditions of the issuing of certificate A1. So the slide that was presented, that side of the slide is the most important. We can always show an A1 and it's always the right one, but if the conditions are not guaranteed, then it will still be authentic, but it will be disputed by other authorities. So trust. Mathilde, you can conclude. Well, I wanted to talk about this issue of collaboration of data and digitalization, as was raised. This is the key, indeed, to have more data, better understand these phenomena, and if we don't have a good idea of the posted workers now we do have good data. We know exactly how many posted workers there are, how much they earn, and what they do. So I think it's very optimistic then for the future in terms of what we can do with these new tools. So I think there are two different channels or ways that we can improve data on posted workers. First of all, collaboration over and beyond national collaboration, but collaboration between different players. So from the point of view of social security, for the job, international trade. So at the moment, in Europe, we have a uniform tool to declare international services. You've got the VAT declaration, and but there's no way of moving from the international declaration of VAT to the international service provision. So these there are two tools that already exist, and this would allow us to know if there was a declaration of VAT, if the VAT should be paid, if there had been a service provided. Do we have to consult another database? So in France, we could have more communication between those who issue the A1 and the JFE that collects the data on VAT on service provision. So we need to have a legal framework as well, so that we can link the data. So if we take the example of two countries that I work with, France and Luxembourg. Luxembourg issues its A1, and so I can see the posted worker in Luxembourg, employer, how much he earns, and also I can see the French data with the ADS data and other kinds of data, but I have no way of linking these two databases. But if we could link the databases, this would allow us to check the conditions of the A1, as Bruno suggested, and we can see that the company has 25% of its activity in Luxembourg. But in certain cases, Luxembourg doesn't want to provide this data, and France doesn't want to provide it. So We need to think about how we can allow these countries to provide their data and work better on this kind of phenomenon. Well, I think that's a very good closing words. So we're going back to trust now. We can see that the conditions exist for that. We've seen many things that exist, very positive outlook. So this review is indeed taking place and cooperation does continue to be developed. But there are still a lot of work to do on data, on cooperation between countries that don't use this system. So thank you very much to our panelists for these very interesting debates. Do we have the time to take a couple of questions? Unless you need to leave. So just one question then for Madame Bischoff, if we have one from the auditorium. Well, no. Oh, yes, we do have one. We've got one over here. Madame Bischoff, you talked about working on a number for European social security. Where are we at with that particular issue?
To answer fast, President Juncker, remember, he was the president of the Commission before Madame von der Leyen promised this to deliver until 2018, I think. And an impact assessment was done. We don't know the impact assessment, but in the better regulation procedures, it got stuck. And therefore, we still don't have it. And we are pushing as a parliament. There are now different solutions in the pipeline, not as, I would say, full covering as the original idea was. But I think this also, and I think digitalization can help to increase trust. I think it's essential, and all the different digital solutions should be pushed on. But I give to the Commission to answer this one.
Merci bien. Je vais répondre uniquement une...
So I'm going to answer the question once Gabrielle has left the room. So under the Juncker presidents, there was a proposal that was made of a European social security number. So, so we've carried out the impact studies, and we realized that creating a European number on top of national numbers or instead of national numbers. If you take the case of a country like Germany, there are 9 different social security numbers depending on the branch. So the idea of creating a European number on top of all these other numbers or instead of those numbers, that led to some very, to an unending debate. How can we replace national competence that doesn't exist at the European level? So why would countries accept to have this extra number imposed upon them? So as we worked on this, our colleagues from other department, DG Connect, who worked on the digital wallet, said, well, you don't need a number. All you need is digital identification, and that doesn't require the creation of an alphanumerical number with 9 different characters. So when you create a wallet and you can identify the person by digital processors, EESC, for example, which gives you an EU ID, then you have an identification. You don't need to create a number, and you can use this again to identify the person for social security, for their university diplomas, for their driving license. So there's a whole host of different applications that you can use these wallets for with digital ID. And so you don't need that number. So because then this already led to some feisty discussions. So at the end of the day, all this has been replaced by Espace ISSN. You can that will be replaced by Espace, and It's part of the wallet system, and this will allow you to have a verification of your social rights, but also other aspects as well. Your diplomas, your driving license, this kind of thing. And ISSN, we can forget that, and it will be replaced by ESPAS. So on those optimistic words, let us close this session. Thank you to everybody. So I would ask you for a few minutes longer for your attention, just to draw some conclusions from this day. So in terms of concluding this day, which was entitled Supporting Generations, this challenge shared by all the European systems for social protection. I'd like to thank Madam la President, and all those people who organized this day. Also, I'd like to thank all the different speakers, ladies and gentlemen, for their very interesting interventions and presentations. You've highlighted our areas of conversion and differences as well, the difficulties that lie in wait for us within the European Union and for each of our social security systems. The first roundtable allowed us to better understand the challenges of aging in France as in the whole of Europe. So in France, the ratio between working population and pensioners moving from 3 to 10 to 6 to 10, this is very striking. So and this has been managed in various ways between the different countries. So this will have an impact on our retirement systems and also our social security systems. They haven't all these systems haven't been used in the same way. The comparison with the Danish system was particularly interesting. So the retirement age in Denmark is much later than in France, but it's the priority which is set to keep people in their homes. That was underscored. Many measures were adopted so that seniors can stay in their own homes, and so that focus is put on prevention, maintaining individual autonomy by working with the seniors and developing this autonomy further due to the use of digital tools and adapting homes. France is lagging behind. We just have 109,000 adaptations of homes per year. So autonomy systems are being implemented. So we will have to accompany and support both the people over 65 years old, but also younger people, and this by using acting early. So also the issue of carers was mentioned. As the representative from Denmark mentioned, it's by working together that we'll be able to face these demographic challenges. The situation has to be looked at globally, keeping in mind the fact that the situation of each country, they're facing economic, social, environmental challenges, and that is a source of concern for all generations. Inequalities are worsening, social mobility no longer works, and solidarity is also being tested. So we have to develop new solutions. These debates have been led at European level. As you underscore, there's a strong principle of solidarity and equality. The second roundtable showed the need for having family policies and unemployment benefit to fight against poverty. The poverty rate in France which is particularly impactful for children. especially in single-parent families. This is very much linked to jobs and unemployment. So taking care of children is one of the priorities. The fight against poverty requires a public system which is organized to allow children to come into these centers and benefit from the same chances as other children. As the unemployment systems, the redistributive ones, and to which all people contribute, these contribute indirectly to the fight against poverty. But as has already been said, it's work which really allows you to move away from poverty. So the common job in terms of minimum income, this is a true challenge, and it is being monitored at the moment. The Czech Republic's case is very instructive. And its efforts in terms of carers, particularly in terms of access to the labour market, were mentioned. A system of job sharing was mentioned. The policy for caring for children, that was also mentioned at length. Just like an access to education. So taking in Ukrainian refugees also is an extra challenge for the whole of Europe, particularly in terms of giving them access to jobs and also schooling for children. Reviewing the Barcelona objectives is key in order to have clear objectives, especially in terms of caring for and educating children. Fighting poverty requires multidimensional approaches, and so investment is required. So this was pointed out in the different interventions. Joint work should be carried out in terms of implementing this minimum income, and this is a challenge for the French presidency of the European Union. The third roundtable concerned innovation and prices. Innovation which is key for all European countries, is often the synonym of an increase in price or high prices. Now, in order to see if a raise in price is justified or not, it is vital to have all the comparative data between the existing products and the new products that are being proposed. So a product which gives an advantage over an existing treatment is not necessarily a completely innovative product. To respond to these difficulties, it is desirable in terms of solidarity to develop common objectives and a common approach in terms of pricing. An continued increase of prices is not acceptable. France has a method for setting prices and setting up clear rules for access to market. This will simplify access to innovation and also access for patients. The challenges that are of concern for all of us is predictability and anticipation. The time for access to innovative medicines, and the balance between the initial assessment and the real benefits, supporting this health model and its funding. The importance of transparency as well at all levels was also mentioned. The Belgian example calls into question the current balance between the pharmaceutical industry and systems and health insurance systems, which is more of a financier than a partner. Individually, countries can markets for developed products and products which are distributed around the world. Some medicines whose efficacy has not been fully established. For that, Belgium has introduced temporary contracts. For Germany, for a short time, they've been applying a payment system for medicines based on the service rendered. But they have installed a 6-month period for free pricing for these new medicines. Problems encountered during the pandemic have also highlighted the need in Europe to have supply chains which are reliable in order to guarantee the availability of medicines across all our countries. So each member state will determine its reimbursement policy, but it is no longer possible to ignore the problems of shortages or structural problems, the non-availability of some products in various countries, the difficulties of supply. Europe is called on to think collectively about these challenges and to adopt a strategy, have a more integrated approach. The fact that Europe has developed an approach of joint supply. This was adopted in the strategy on vaccines. This shows that it is possible to move forward in terms of cooperation when the need for solidarity, collective solidarity, is sufficiently high. So in the same way, we need to relocalize and have infrastructure which is able to provide what we so sorely needed during the pandemic. Without wanting to be too lengthy, on the last roundtable that you had, working on securing social protection for workers is absolutely key. By working on the reduction of social competitiveness. In order to achieve this so that we can guarantee to each and every one of us social protection which is fair, the issue of data is absolutely key, physical data, but also associated with teleworking. We've seen that trust as well is necessary in order to move forward in terms of a legal framework for European mobility and international mobility, which is fair and equitable. To conclude, resilience of our social protection systems and economic and social convergence, the fight against unemployment at all ages, the aging of the populations and the fight against poverty, social coverage for all workers. This day has allowed us to deepen our sense of solidarity. And rather than taking stock of the problems, we have opened up to many prospects for social protection for the future, and we have responded. We want to respond to the problems that you have identified. So you can count on the the EESC to help you in this task. Thank you for your attention.
Petit mot de conclusion. Merci beaucoup.
Just a few words of conclusion. Thank you, Madam Chair. Many thanks to the French European Environmental and Social Council. Thanks to the French presidency for giving us the label. We've been preparing for this for 18 months. Many thanks to the board of directors of REIF. Many thanks to all the moderators, facilitators, speakers, panelists. It was a very rich, very fruitful discussion. We had a lot of important topics that were discussed. We wanted to highlight our European counterparts. We had people from different horizons. We were very pleased. It was also accessible online, and we had participants online, and it will be broadcast on the website of REIF. You will also receive the minutes. I think it was a good way to work together with the Economic and Social Council and REIF. We are going to continue doing that. We will have our webinars, and we're not going to wait until France gets the presidency of the European Union every 14 years. And you know, I'm going to leave REIF next week. I'm going to go to the École Nationale de la Sécurité Sociale in charge of international relations. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all and to make sure that we keep in touch. Many thanks to all of you, and I will be very pleased to meet you again in another setting. Many thanks to REIF and to the Economic Council for this beautiful event. Thank you, and thank you.